Good morning, guys. Today is the Ask Me Anything episode where I put out a post asking for questions. I've had a ton of new subscribers lately. So I've done one of these before, and anything goes really, personal life, gardening, homesteading, whatever. But I had you guys ask me a bunch of questions to answer over the course of about 2 weeks, and today we are answering those questions. And while I answer these questions, I'm going to do some garden work that is the boring stuff that just needs to get done. So I've got to redo one of my tomato beds drip system. I've had to redo it for a while, and I've just been hand watering it a little bit more than usual. But we are going to take our annual trip to Missouri here pretty soon, and I don't want to impose hand watering my garden on the people that are watching it for a week. So we're gonna get this done today and also plant some more tomatoes that I have unfortunately had to rip out because of disease. All right, guys, so for these questions, I'm just going to read off the question and not name who it was from, because half of these screen names on YouTube are unpronounceable, or they're just letters and numbers. So I will likely, in editing, just add the question screenshot at the bottom, and then you guys can take credit for whoever asked that question. But the first question is, the year or years coming up to having your farm, what did you do to prep? Or did you jump into it all at once? What do you think helped versus what you would have done differently? So I didn't really prep in the sense of like learning to can or learning a ton of food preservation or everything before I bought this property. My basic prep before buying this property was just being completely addicted to YouTube videos about it, reading tons of books, learning everything that I could about homesteading. At the time, right before I bought this property, I was living with my best friend, Lindsay, at her house, and I had been for a few years. I'd never owned a home before, so this was all a brand new dream, not just having a homestead and animals and gardening. It was like just owning a home, period. I've shot a few videos at my mom's house in another town. She lives pretty close to me where I grew up. I grew up on 3 acres. I wouldn't necessarily call it a farm. I guess it could have been a farm. But we had horses, a goat at one time, chickens, ducks, all that sort of stuff. And it was casual. It wasn't a homestead or anything. But my mom grew up gardening, and, you know, we had livestock. So getting a property or starting a homestead wasn't really that daunting for me, because I'd grown up in that kind of landscape. I'd grown up owning livestock and watching my mom garden a bunch of flowers in her courtyard. And I have an animal science major, so I had, you know, when I was younger, thought I was going to be a vet, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, it wasn't that hard for me to like jump in. Having that kind of experience when I was growing up, I think made it easier for me to, when I bought this house, just kind of start gardening immediately and get chickens immediately. Not because I knew anything or I had done a lot of preparation besides learning about things, but because I'd been there before as a child. It was just, it made it more comfortable. Now, all the actual prepping stuff, like food prep and learning all those skills, I didn't do any of that before I came to this property. That was all off the cuff learning. But, and I've talked about this in a recent video, it helped that I started this farm, this homestead, slowly. I only started in my first year with 2 garden beds and like 3 chickens that ended up getting taken out by coyotes anyways. So a major part of homesteading is, you know, preserving all this food and learning canning and learning all these new skills. I wasn't really like steamrolled into that super quickly because I only had 2 garden beds. You know, I had a couple of tomato plants, a couple pepper plants, and that's not much to have to take care of in 1 year. And just so by growing this property slowly, I was able to learn all those skills that I now have at a slower pace. It wasn't under pressure that I was learning these things. I would say, like, yeah, if you want to start a homestead and immediately get a 2,000 square foot garden and chickens and goats and cows, then you might need to do a little bit more prepping in the waiting room. So, but I did not. I just did a bunch of reading. I learned a bunch of stuff, watched a ton of YouTube videos, and then, you know, kind of waded into the pool instead of diving headfirst into the deep end. All right, guys, we had a bit of a breeze pickup. So I'm going to hide right here in the wall while I answer the next question, or a few. What would your dream farm look like? Now, at this point in my life, where we're just working toward our goal of moving back east towards Missouri, where Chase is from, I will just be happy anywhere that's green and that rains. But ideally, a dream farm, ooh, I'll just do like geographical dream farm, because, you know, at different stages in your life, you never know what animals you're going to have or what requirements you'll need from your farm. But I would like somewhere, obviously green, where it rains, between 5 and 20 acres, ideally. So I want enough land to run cattle on, because beef is a major staple of our diet, and cows are awesome. And so I want enough pasture land to be able to manage a couple of cows, whether that be both dairy and beef or just beef. But I don't want something so big that it's unmanageable. I mean, I already take care of this 1.5 acre property pretty much by myself. It's something that I like to do. I enjoy working with my hands in the yard. But this is almost unmanageable for one person. So adding any more acres to that would be crazy. I would also like some part of the property to be wooded. So I obviously need pasture land for farming, but I also want some wooded acreage for foraging. Mushrooms would be so cool to forage for. And, you know, just basic staples like wood. I would love a wood burning stove at our home. To be able to cut our own wood would be great. You know, just so like partially wooded property, partially pastured. 5 to 20 acres. If there's more acreage, that's fine, as long as it's wooded and I don't have to manage it too much. I also want some sort of water feature on the property, whether that be a pond or a stream or a spring. And ideally, my dream farm, the spring, there would be a spring situated somewhere at higher elevation in the surrounding area of my farm, that obviously I have rights to, and that I could use to gravity water my livestock in the pastures below. So that's about where I'm at on like ideal farm layout. And then beyond that is all details that obviously I'm just dreaming here. Finding a quintessential piece of property can be extremely difficult, but that would be my ideal baseline for a new piece of property elsewhere. Okay, I stood up to try. The gnats were really bad close to the ground. If you could see the amount of gnats on my camera right now. Oh, I hate these things. All right. The next question. Do you have irrigation rights? If so, do you use them? If you don't, what are the challenges preventing using them? This is an excellent question from a subscriber that has been with me for a long time. LG something, always commenting on my videos, you rock. But no, I do not have irrigation rights. Unfortunately, I've looked into it. Several people along my road do, and there's actually a levee for irrigation that comes on the back of my property, but not as far as my property goes. So I've called the OSE, Office of something. They handle water rights, irrigation rights in this area for the state of New Mexico. And I could apply to get irrigation rights, or I could apply to get an irrigation well. So right now I have a domestic well on my property. It only goes 200 something feet deep. It's a pretty shallow well, and it's not meant for irrigating, so it's only for household use. If I wanted to put an irrigation well in here so that I could use large amounts of water to water my property, I would have to apply for it. Ew, there was a gnat in my mouth. I would have to apply for it, and I have to prove to the state that I am using this water for some sort of agricultural purpose that will benefit the community. So if I were, I've thought about it, I've entertained the idea about like farming on a larger scale and maybe selling it at the farmer's market or something. But it's not really my passion. Like, I like farming for self-sufficiency. That's my thing. I like homesteading. I'm not really interested in using my land for the purposes of making money and making food for other people. Not in a bad way. Like, I'm not trying to be mean. So maybe if, you know, it came down to it and I really, really needed an irrigation well because our domestic well, there's something wrong with it, maybe I would apply for it and then actually start farming on a larger scale here. But as of right now, I don't need it. I'm not really interested in it. I'd rather, you know, expand my rainwater catchment system, use other methods to use less water in my garden rather than do all this rigmarole just to get an irrigation well put in. But I wish I did. I wish I had bought this property and it had irrigation rights like a lot of the other properties on my land do. Unfortunately, that was not the case. And this would have been way more expensive, so. All right, I just went and put on a bunch of bug spray because these gnats are out of control right at dawn. All right, the next question, where's my phone? I'm moving to Albuquerque and I am super nervous about gardening in such a foreign climate. I'm from DC. That is a big change. Are there any particular resources like books that are specific to high desert gardening that you recommend? Yes, so many. One particular author that I really, really love, he's based out of Arizona. He does a lot of work with the indigenous communities there and saving seeds, and he works with Native Seed Search. If you've ever been to that website and purchased seeds from them, his name is Gary Nabhan, or Nabhan. Nabhan. I'll put it on the screen. Amazing books. He writes a ton of books that I really, really love. So one of the coolest and most helpful books I've read by him is called Growing Food in a Hotter, Drier Land. As well as he writes this tiny little novella called Mesquite, an Arboreal Love Affair. It's such an amazing book as well. Not really, it's informative, mostly about the mesquite tree, but he just has a really poetic way of writing and I love it. So Growing Food in a Hotter, Drier Land, I absolutely recommend. I will link that down below in my Amazon storefront. In fact, any of the items I've talked about today, the herb hanging rack, these books, they're all linked down below in my Amazon storefront, so you can check them out there. Another desert book that I really like is called The Ecology of Herbal Medicine. Let me get the author's name for you. Dara Saville, or Seville. This isn't so much a desert gardening book as it's talking more about like the ecology of native desert plants, specifically in the Albuquerque area, because that's where this author is from and where she's writing about. It's just really, really informative. I don't really have any go-to, this is how to garden in the desert books. They're more like really good reads, and you just pick up a lot of tidbits of information in them. Growing Food in a Hotter, Drier Land is more of a how-to. It's really neat because it gives you a lot of indigenous methods of growing dry land farming that they have practiced for thousands of years, the communities in Arizona. A really awesome book. I highly recommend. But like I said, I have made a video about this before. I believe both of the books I just said were listed in it. I'll link the video down below. My Amazon storefront with all of my book recommendations is linked down below. And I hope that can help you because I read a lot and I have a ton of books to recommend. So on to the next. Interested to know how you dry out your peppers and calendula flowers / herbs to store for use throughout the year. Is it just allowing them to dry out inside or using a dehydrator? So this is a two-part question. First and foremost, my calendula and other herbs, I almost always, like 98% of the time, air dry them. You can dehydrate both peppers and herbs in the dehydrator or in open air. But for the herbs, they're just a little bit more delicate than your vegetables. And although a lot of drier settings, mine included, I have a casori, goes to an herb setting, which I believe is 95 degrees Fahrenheit. it's still a little hot. I put herbs in the dehydrator before, and the really, really frail ones, like the leafy ones, cilantro, parsley, dill, stuff like that, they'll get crispy. It's just too hot. And when I air dry my herbs, obviously in the summer it's like 105 degrees here during the day, I'm also not drying my herbs outside in the open air in 105 degrees. I have this hanging rack that I just bought off of Amazon this year that's working really, really well. I like it. But I just place my herbs in the garage on that rack. And before I had that rack, I used like some extra fencing I used to have, and just let them dry there for a couple days is sometimes all it takes, a week maybe. And then they're perfectly fine. They retain a lot more of their color, their flavor, and they're not burned to a crisp like they might be if you put them in the dehydrator. Like I said, that's not saying you can't use a dehydrator. I just prefer to dry mine in the air. Now, as for my peppers, I do use a dehydrator for my peppers. And that is because it's quicker and it's easier. You can dehydrate your peppers in open air. There's actually a really common cultural method called a ristra that's very popular here, especially for red chili. And I've tried that before. It's just time consuming. They can be really pretty and fun to make, but it's kind of like braiding your garlic. I also don't braid my garlic to store it. I have these reusable cotton breathable bags that I just put my garlic and onions in, because ristras are pretty and fun and garlic braids are pretty and fun, but I don't have a lot of time to make them. But I just dehydrate my peppers in the dehydrator. There's a setting for vegetables. I don't remember what it is. I think it's 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And then they're done. I harvest a lot of peppers at once, stick them in the dehydrator for 12 hours, and then put them away. It's really just ease of use and time efficiency as to why I dehydrate them rather than let them air dry. There's really no quality difference in the peppers when you dehydrate versus air dry, like there may be if you dehydrate your herbs. All right, I'm taking a break from that tomato bed. Those tomato plants are out of control. This is the one time I regret not pruning anything, because it's making it really difficult to weave that drip line in there. The next question is, what has been your experience with pests? From snakes to mice to plant destroying bugs, and what solutions have worked best for you? So the only real pest problems I have consistently from year to year are going to be the beet leaf hopper, which transmits curly top tomato virus, squash bugs, which there is no cure for, gophers, which there is a cure for, and what else? Oh, how could I forget? Roly-polies or pill bugs. Those are a major problem in my garden. So starting with the first, the beet leaf hopper. I've done a whole video about curly top tomato virus, and I will link that down below. There's not really anything you can do to control the beet leaf hopper or the curly top tomato virus. The way this virus is transmitted is by this particular vector, this one bug, the beet leaf hopper. And it just transmits the virus as it's passing through during its migration. In my county, in my area, my extension office has two major times that the beet leaf hopper does its migration. I think one of them is in May and the other is in June or July. I haven't done any more research on besides that, but there's not a lot you can do to control them unless you just completely enclose your plants with either some sort of fabric cover or in a greenhouse away from flying pests. The tomato isn't actually a food source for the beet leaf hopper. It doesn't love the tomato. It just lands on it, takes a bite to see if it will want to eat it. When it finds out it doesn't, it moves on. But in that bite, it transmits the virus. There's not a whole lot of prevention, especially as an organic gardener. But even as a conventional gardener using chemical pesticides, if the beet leaf hopper bites your plant, yes, it will die if it's got pesticide on it, but it still bit the plant in the process. So your plant's still going to die. It's a terrible, terrible disease with a terrible pest. And there's not much I can do to mitigate it. But I have not seen any instances of curly top tomato virus this year yet, knock on wood. We'll see. We'll see if it comes this year, but I have had it 3 the 2 past years, I've had curly top tomato virus in my garden. The second pest, squash bugs. There's not a lot to do for squash bugs, except to pick them off. And that's what I do. I come out here every morning and I pick off what I can see. I rub the eggs off of the bottom of the leaves. And that's the best I can do to mitigate squash bug damage. There's just really nothing else that works. You can use soapy water, but if you're gonna get close enough to spray the bug, like saturate the bug with soapy water, you might as well just pick them off. That's my reasoning. The next problem, gophers. I do have gophers on my property, which doesn't really bother me unless they're starting to create a lot of holes in my very sparse yard. Will I then do something? But I did have a gopher in my garden bed last year, which I took care of. There is a I'm just gonna say it, I killed the gopher. The gopher is dead. I've killed many gophers because I don't want them on my property, and I'm not going to dig up their holes to rehome them somewhere else. It's not happening. But there is a non-pesticidal way to do it. You can actually do it yourself, but I called out a local pest company. They do it for $50. They come and they just stick carbon monoxide in the hole and it kills the gopher. You can do it with your own car's exhaust and a hose, but that's the way I deal with them. Honestly, I've only had them in my garden once, and if they're not in my garden and they're not completely tearing up my yard, I let them be. It's only when they cause a problem that I get rid of the gophers. And the last, pill bugs. My goodness, roly-polies are the bane of my existence. They are extremely beneficial in the garden because they help break down decaying organic matter so that it becomes soil. But they also eat all of my seedlings up. So this year I used like a slug and snail killer. I've used Sluggo Plus before. It works mainly on slugs and snails, but it also works on roly-polies. It's these little pellets that contain spinosad, which is an organic pesticide, and iron phosphate. And basically when the bugs eat it, it makes them not want to eat anything else, from what I understand, and they just starve to death. It has been pretty darn effective this year in my garden. I'm very happy with the results. I don't love using a pesticide, even if it's approved organic, but I really like having food more. And without that pesticide, I would have half of the plants that I have right now, because I can't put a seedling in the ground without them chopping off its head and just devouring it. It's a really big problem I have here. So that's how I deal with them, and they aren't completely gone. There's still roly-polies everywhere, but when I spray, when I put that pelletized stuff over my seeds that I just planted, they'll die in the immediate area. And then my seedlings have a chance to come up, and then by the time they recolonize and there's roly-polies back there, the seedlings are strong and big and they can handle a little bit of pest pressure. So that's really all I deal with. Of course, in the spring, I've got aphids and stuff. I just spray them off with a water hose. They're not a huge deal. And then they're gone by mid-spring because it's 100 degrees out here. So that's so far my 4th year on this property. Those are really the only pests I have had, besides some stray cats digging in my garden. So for the most part, I would say I have it pretty easy compared to a lot of you guys out there, like in wetter climates that are dealing with tons of bugs and slugs. I couldn't imagine. But at least you have rain. So this next question is kind of a show and tell. But it says, you've mentioned that you water by hand a bit. And if that's the case, do you use Oyas, since you have the hose out anyways? I'm wondering if they are useful in such a large garden and if the water dries up within a day anyways. This is a great question. And it's something that I've maybe mentioned once in one of my earliest videos, but I haven't done a dedicated video on Oyas yet, just because I personally don't use them a ton. And there's a ton of videos on Oyas. I didn't really think I needed to add to the market, but if you guys would like to see a video of Oyas, how I've used them in the past and how I make them, by all means, let me know down in the comments and I will do that. But what Oyas are, if any of you are unfamiliar, is basically a large clay pot that you fill with water, stick in your soil, and it's supposed to water for several days, depending on your climate, several days up to a week. It slowly waters the area around the soil, making it less necessary for you to water either on a daily basis or a weekly basis, etc., etc. Now, from my experience, they are useful. In a garden this large, I would say no. So this is the first garden bed I ever made on this property. It's 4 years old, still going strong. And when I built it, I put a bunch of Oyas in here. Now, Oyas can get really, really expensive, guys. If you decide you want to try and use them, please do not buy, unless you're supporting a local business and that's your thing. But like the fancy designated clay pot Oyas that some people sell are super expensive for what they do and what they are. I can recommend that you go to your local big box store and get these little clay pots. I think they're like $4. They're like just the 6-inch clay pots. You can get them in a different size if you want. And they come with this. They come with the base so that water can drip out, and the pot. Super cheap. And then what you do, if I can get all the mud off of here, the hole that is in the bottom of this pot, I just caked it with plumber's putty to seal it. You want this sealed. You want a sealed, closed clay container that you can fill with water. You bury this in the dirt, so you can see it's been buried up to here. And I just conveniently used the bottom tray, place it on top, and that stops both the water from evaporating out the top, but also bugs and dirt from getting in the bottom like there is in here. I don't know if you guys can see that. I don't think you can see that. And then you just bury it in the soil. And when you're doing your watering, you come in here, you fill this up with water, close it, and it should water the plants in the immediate area around here. And Oyas are effective. They really are. I encourage you to try them if you've never tried them and you live in a dry climate. When I pulled this out the first year, it was really cool to see, but there were just roots like glued against the outside of this clay pot from the plants accessing the water that's slowly seeping out of the clay. The problem with using Oyas now in such a large garden is that I would just have to use so many. And the same time that it would, not the same time, about the same time it would take me to fill all the Oyas I would need, I could just water it by hand. Now, it is convenient for something like if you're going on a trip and you'll be gone for a weekend, fill up all your Oyas and your plants should be fine for that weekend. They won't need any water. That is perfectly reasonable use for Oyas. But in my case, with all these plants here, you can see I have Oyas in this bed at maybe 1 to 2 foot intervals, but I have 20 times the number of plants in here, and there's no way that I would be able to put an Oya at every 2 corn plants to sufficiently water them. I would either have to get a ton of clay pots to be able to sufficiently water all of the plants in my garden. I would also have to cut down on my plants because I would have to space them according to how many pots I could fit in my soil. Now, for stuff like big containers, if you have like a huge pot and you've got a tomato plant in it, stick one of these in there. That's good. That's perfect. It's solid. It's extremely effective. It's just not effective on the scale that I've now created my garden to be. I hope that answers your question. I think they're an extremely beneficial tool for hot weather gardeners or desert gardeners or any gardener really that just wants a little bit more hands-off time in the garden. I just don't think, for me, it's scalable to this size. My garden is very big. As for how fast the water went through, I would say on my hottest days when the plants are needing a lot of water, the soil is warming up, the water would be gone in 1 to 2 days. And you really want to make sure the seal on the bottom of your pot, if you make this yourself, is solid, because you don't want to put water in here and then the water's just going straight to the bottom of the bed and the plants aren't getting any of it. But when it's working properly, the water just kind of like through osmosis goes through that clay. It's really cool. It's effective. I would say on a not super hot day, the water will last in the Oyas for 2 to 4 days. So they are good. They are good. They're just not good for me right now. Not really a question to answer, I guess, but could we get a rough sketch or something of an aerial view of the garden/homestead layout? I love seeing this type of thing, but have a hard time visualizing the flow and layout from most YouTuber videos. I agree. I'm so sorry. You asked this question, and I believe I linked a video. I do have an early summer 2023, I believe, garden tour where I had Chase, because it's Chase's drone. He brought it out and did a whole view of like the river levee and the farm. It's not a very pretty one because it was in the middle of the winter, so everything is dead. But I need to get another drone layout of the property. I don't know how to work that thing, and I don't really want to teach myself because it's an expensive piece of equipment that's not mine. So I need to get Chase out here to do another drone shot. Unfortunately, when it's like green and beautiful and exactly when I would love a drone to take an aerial view of this garden, I have the shade cloth up and you can't see anything over the top of this garden. But I will definitely get some more drone footage this year. It's just a matter of me remembering, honestly, and getting Chase out here to do it. Maybe he could fly his drone under the shade cloth. It wouldn't show much though. I don't know. I will get you more drone footage, but like I said, I did link, I believe, in your comment, a video to where it shows a little bit of it. All right, guys, the sun's coming out and this light isn't flattering at all. I apologize. But the next question is, how much of your family's food comes from your farm? That's a difficult question. In previous videos, I've said about 80% of produce. I still hold to that. But so 100% of our chicken meat. So we raise 100% of our own meat chickens. We don't buy chicken at the store anymore. We also raise 100% of our own eggs. Even during the winter, it doesn't get that cold. The eggs still continue to come in slowly. We just curb our consumption of them. So we get 100% of our eggs and 100% of our chicken meat from our farm. As for produce, meat too. So I don't have any cattle. We eat a lot of beef, but we do get 30%-ish of our red meat from us, not our farm necessarily, but me and Chase do hunt, usually every year if we draw for hunts. But the past couple years we have both tagged out on deer. Last year we brought 2 deer home. It's quite a bit of meat. So I would say like 30-ish. I think 30 is a good estimate. Deer are way smaller than a cow. So 30% of our meat comes from our own hands, not our farm, but our own hands. But we do have to outsource 100% of our beef, which comes from a local grass-fed, fodder-finished cattle farm called Ganados del Rey. I've talked about them before when we get packaged meat orders, but we usually buy about a cow at a time, and that will last us a full year. So we'll purchase a whole cow, we'll have our deer meat, our chicken meat, and our eggs. Now for produce. I do grow 80% of our produce, but that comes with a caveat. If your goal is to grow a large amount of your vegetables or fruit or both for the entire year, you either have to live somewhere where it never freezes, so you have to live in the tropics that you can grow year round, or you have to learn to preserve, store your produce, and eat seasonally. So when I say I grow 80% of my produce, that is because we are eating produce seasonally, as well as taking measures to preserve our harvest when we have it. So last year I grew, for the most part, minus 1 or 2 like tomato purchases at the store over the winter. Essentially I grew 100% of our tomatoes. But tomatoes only grow from June to September. So all of those tomatoes that I get in those few months, I have to preserve in some way to keep using those same tomatoes throughout the winter. And for me and Chase, that can be easy because I cook most of the meals. He and I have similar tastes. We're just like a meat, veg, and rice kind of family. So we're fine eating like really plain, eating whatever vegetables come to the table that day. But for most of you that have been on this channel for a while, you know that Chase has 3 kids. He has 50% custody of them, so we get them half the time, and Mom has them half the time. When the kids are here, it's a little bit different. I can't grow any fruit here. I don't grow any fruit. So I'm purchasing, you know, berries, apples. They really love those little, what are the little tangerine things? Mandarins. They love those. I'm buying fruit at the store because I can't grow fruit. I'm also buying packaged foods and processed foods because I'm not dogmatic about eating healthy. And kids don't love everything. So they have their tastes and their preferences. So with the kids being here, it can be a little bit more difficult to 100% eat the stuff that I grow, although I do make allowances. But it also requires being inventive. You know, if I want to not have to purchase tomatoes at the store, then I better find several ways to use those tomatoes to make food interesting and exciting and new. And people like variety. Diets like variety. I don't want to just eat tomato sauce for 9 straight months or just eat fresh tomatoes for 4 straight months. You're going to need to be inventive if you want to grow all of your produce. You're going to need to find 10 different ways to use an eggplant so that your family doesn't get bored of eating the same eggplant that you've been growing for 3 months. So I say all this because when I say I grow 80% of my produce, there's a big caveat. It takes a lot of work, not only to just grow all of that food, but to preserve it so that you actually use it for the whole year, so that you keep to your word about growing your own food. It's just a ton of work. It requires commitment beyond just growing and harvesting. You're going to have to look up different recipes. You're going to have to become inventive with the ways you use things. So yeah, I would say like 80% of my vegetables because we eat seasonally and I find new and interesting ways to use the same boring stuff that I grow. All right, the next question is, how did you amend your in-ground soil before you started planting in it? Did you use a tiller, compost? So yes, my in-ground garden, I actually have an entire video, which I'll link below, like when I created my in-ground garden. I did use a tiller to begin the garden just because although I have really sandy soil, it's extremely compacted because it's so dry. So I had to till my rows before I even put any soil down. But on top of tilling it, yes, I did add garden soil. I believe it was Kellogg's garden soil. And I also added peat moss for a little bit of water retention because of our extremely sandy soil. So there were, a few amendments. I didn't like completely fill the raised rows with soil. I used the native soil mixed in with some peat moss for water holding capacity and some of that garden soil from Kellogg's for organic matter. But since then, the only thing I do to amend the garden beds every year is add a little bit of garden soil on top as like a topsoil layer, and then some organic fertilizer and such. For the most part, my in-ground beds are a small amount of garden soil on top, followed by just native sand underneath. But they are getting better slowly and slowly, year by year, because I do mulch with wood chips and straw and all that other good stuff that breaks down over time. So I am increasing what's the word I'm looking for? Health and vitality of the soil. It's just happening at a slow rate because I'm cheap. Ooh, that sun is far too bright for me to try to look in the camera. All right, 2 more questions to go. Can you explain how your climate works and how it affects growing? I never realized there was a monsoon season in the South. Yes, there is a monsoon season here. It's different in different places in the South. I'm not sure about everywhere else. I just know my local area. We have our monsoon season between July and September. It's supposed to be. Last year we barely even got one. I'm not sure what this year's going to be like. I don't really expect much. We are a desert for a reason. But my climate generally is very, very dry. It's an arid climate. I live in the high desert, so it's about 4,000 feet elevation. My particular property is in a wind tunnel, so I get a lot of east flowing winds, especially in the spring, that can be extremely drying. And it's hot. It's very, very hot here. How that affects my growing? Well, it's hard. It's hard for plants to survive and thrive in any extreme environment, whether it's me that's really hot and dry, or somewhere in deep Florida where it's just raining all the time. Very difficult and out there climates are just hard on plants. So particularly with my area, obviously the dryness is a big factor. It makes plants dry out a lot quicker. You have to water more often, especially when there's wind blowing. There's something called evapotranspiration that occurs on the leaves of a plant. So it's actually losing water through its leaves because of the heat and the dryness. So it does require watering a little bit more. Plants tend to wilt in the middle of the day, starting mid-spring all the way till August, September, because it's just so hot. It doesn't mean they're dying. They're just very sad. And they just want the heat to go away. And when it's nighttime, they'll perk back up again. But that happens in humid areas too. If it's just a heat reaction. As for the elevation, that makes our sun a little bit more intense. We are closer to the sky. The sun has a tendency to burn leaves more here than it would in lower elevation places. So you take two plants, you take one in the low desert of Arizona and one in the high desert of New Mexico, and you put them under the same sun. The plant in the high desert is going to burn its leaves faster just because it's closer to the sun. So there are a lot of things that I deal with here. But because it's so hot and dry, I don't have as many pests, so that's nice. And we don't get a lot of fungal diseases. I don't have a lot of blight in my tomatoes just because there's not a ton of moisture to cause fungal disease on the leaves. So it's a give and take. I have pluses and minuses living in the desert. As for the monsoon season, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like the first time we get rain once a year. It's nice. A lot of native plants will actually germinate and live their entire life cycle during the monsoon season. They've evolved to be that way. That's pretty neat. If you get into like indigenous, this is going to lead into this person's next question. It's the same person who asked both questions. If you get into if you go to Native Seed Search, which I've talked about before, it has a lot of Arizona native plants that indigenous peoples have been saving seeds for forever. A lot of those seeds are supposed to be planted during the monsoon season. They have a very, very short life cycle, but that's what they have evolved to, the conditions they have evolved to produce in. If you get into that sort of research, it can be really interesting. I don't do a whole bunch of it. As to your next question, have you ever grown in sunken beds? I recently learned about this method of desert farming that indigenous peoples used. Also, have you tried to grow any foods that the indigenous people grow? I saw your wolfberry, and I'm wondering if you tried to grow other food they grow. So I'm not sure what you mean by sunken beds. If you're talking about kind of like creating a well or a pit in the ground and then planting something in there, I guess so. I do that with all of my trees. That's something I've just always done. I don't know if other people do that. It's the way my mom grew plants. I thought everyone did that. It might just be a desert thing. I don't know. But yeah, you create wells where you're planting your plants, and that way any possible water that falls or anything will be concentrated in the root zone of that plant, so it can retain the most water possible in this dry environment. As for like sunken in-ground beds, no, I haven't done any. They're all raised beds. Even my in-ground garden doesn't have sunken beds, although that would probably be a good idea. I'm more concerned with being able to mulch around it, and so I'm creating organic matter. If I have sunken beds, then all of my wood chips are going to fall into those rows and cause a nutrient problem. So my in-ground beds are more or less level with the non-planted parts. But yeah, I think sunken beds is a great method of growing plants when you're in a dry environment. And as for other plants that indigenous people have grown, I'm Not certain of what your question is asking. I don't know which indigenous peoples you're talking about. I know that Native Seed Search saves seeds primarily and works with primarily the, goodness, what is the name of that tribe? Otham tribe in Arizona. I'm not in Arizona, I'm New Mexico. I don't know a whole lot about indigenous communities in this area. Haven't done a ton of research. I have grown seeds, heirloom seeds from nativeseedsearch.org. But no, I'm not like actively doing any research to try and perpetuate indigenous growing methods or plants. So I hope that answered your question. I'm not really sure what your question was specifically asking me for, but I hope that answered it. But that is it, guys. This has been fun. What time is it? 7:01 in the morning. Perfect. I'm gonna finish up that drip line because that was nearly impossible to do with you guys and still get myself in the picture. But thank you for all the questions. This is super fun. I really love answering. Oh no. Okay, I thought I shut it off. Third time's a charm with this mic, huh? I had a lot of fun answering your questions. I like talking to you guys directly. I try and respond to all of your comments and such. But it's nice to get in here in like one big video and just help a bunch of people out that have been meaning to have their questions answered. It's really nice. It's fun. And it saves me from having to think of content because you guys provide it for me. Anyways, thank you for joining me, and I will catch you on the next one.